Can't wait to see which of these clips is put in the beginning of the episode. That's always my
editing.
That's always my favorite thing about watching them is like, which clip is Emery gonna put in the beginning? Hold on, I gotta find a good. I gotta find a good playlist.
I just have the soundtrack on.
You know what my favorite one is?
What is it? The one you sent me?
POV. Joel Miller is your surrogate dad.
Oh, that's the clip. Yep. That's going in the beginning.
All right.
Welcome back to #Deep, the Deep Dive podcast. I am your host, Emery.
And I'm your other host, Spoons.
So, today is my episode. I am very, very excited. It is one of my favorite topics of all time, including the reason I have this on my body forever now.
I forgot about that.
Yeah. So, if you guys aren't aware, one of my favorite things to talk about is The Last of Us. So it's obviously a hot topic due to HBO's series that's airing currently, and
Best show ever.
The new release of the PC version of The Last of Us Part 1. I'm really excited to talk about this. We're kind of just going to do a deep dive, not only in The Last of Us, but also just apocalyptic scenarios, I think, in general, and
Morality.
One thing that we both really, really love is just the morality of, like, what happens when kind of the reason we have ethics and morality kind of go out the window.
Philosophy.
So, we're being philosophers this episode.
I took one philosophy class my freshman year of college, so I think I'm very adequately prepared for this episode.
Oh, absolutely.
You might even call me a professional.
We are professionals, absolutely.
Or a professional. I don't know. That was not even. That was like not even in the realm of joke. That just wasn't good.
If this wasn't a podcast, I'd cut it out.
Goodbye, everyone. Thanks for coming to the show. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Anyways, so before we begin, we're kind of both going to talk a lot about this episode because I have now forcibly made Spoons obsessed with The Last of Us. You're welcome.
I already wanted to watch it, but you jump-started it, and then it just spiraled from there.
think it's just the same thing that happened with Doctor Who. Like, if you guys watched last episode, I've always wanted to watch Doctor Who, but then you kind of, like, pushed me to start, and now I did that with TLOU, so...
Pedro Pascal helped a little bit, too.
Oh, Pedro. We'll get into Pedro.
Pedrito! Sorry.
Oh my gosh, I love him.
Alright, let's just like, can we talk about it? Let's talk about it.
We're starting.
Okay.
So before we get into kind of the deep dive stuff, I'm gonna go over kind of a flash round of info on The Last of Us and my favorite people in the entire world in the gaming industry, Naughty Dog, love of my life. If you don't know, both of my favorite games have been made by them, so the Uncharted series and The Last of Us, both Part 1 and Part 2. So just a few quick facts about The Last of Us as a game and as a franchise. Originally, it was released in 2013, although it started development in 2009, which I thought was kind of crazy, the fact that they've put so much effort into this game. It was published by Sony. Originally, it was a PS4 exclusive, so you couldn't play it on other platforms. It also sold over 1 million copies in the first week of release, which for a game in 2013 is quite insane.
That's impressive. I didn't know that. That's crazy.
Yeah, and since then, we've actually reached over 17 million copies.
I love you say we, like, you're probably like, I'm part of the game development team too. We've sold 17 million copies.
I actually am the CEO of Naughty Dog. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Really? Bombshell.
Yeah. Just secret. I know. I shouldn't have talked about it, but unfortunately.
So you see a red dot appear on your forehead.
The FBI is coming after me.
Oh, gosh.
But there is a little bit of something that I find really funny is just how many times Naughty Dog has re-released the game. So they originally released the game in 2013 for the PS3, and then the PS4 dropped later that year. So they remastered it and released it for the PS4 in 2014, and then they remade the game, Part 1, in 2022 for the release of the PS5. obviously, since it's a Sony exclusive, it makes sense that they would put all the effort to make it optimized for each PlayStation that gets released. But now we're having an official PC/Steam release coming at the end of March 2023 for PC. I think it's running at $60, which is
Yeah. I mean,
I
for
should
a
get a
game
discount, guys. I have
for being the
ink on my
CEO
body.
and for being
Yeah.
the CEO of Naughty Dog.
exactly.
No, like that for a game that size though, I feel like that's and for such popularity.
Technically, I bought the original release for the PS3. I also have the remastered for the PS4. So I don't see myself not spending money to get the Windows version because I have been begging for a PC release. They have since announced, by the way, for anyone curious, originally it was set to release at the beginning of March, after the finale of the HBO series finishes. But because they really want to make sure there's no bugs or any issues when it does get released, they've pushed it towards like the end of March. I think it's like the 23rd now is what they're aiming for. Just wanted to put that out there so people are not freaking out when March 13th comes around and they're like, oh my god, where's the game?
Where did it go?
Just make sure to check Naughty Dog. I'm the one making everything, so
Yeah, definitely.
obviously check it out. And then obviously the HBO adaptation was released in the beginning of January of 2023, starring Pedro Pascal and Bella Ramsey.
Love of my life.
I love them. I literally, in my notes, there's a parentheses that says, I am in love with Pedro Pascal. So there's your answer for that.
I love him. Throw in that clip of that one Pedro Pascal edit.
Oh yeah, the TikTok edit. It's going right here. I will pause while you guys watch the masterpiece playing beside me right now.
We understand if you need to replay it a couple times.
Yeah.
As long as you keep watching the episode after.
I'll put a link in the description if you guys want to.
And go follow the original.
Go follow. Oh my god, they're amazing edits, by the way.
Fantastic.
Anyways, so
All right.
that's kind of some basic info on just part 1. Part 2 is a whole different thing. If you guys want, I will. If you guys want, I will do an episode solely on the story of part 2. Because that's where this came from, obviously. But also just this entire franchise is, in my opinion, probably the best apocalyptic piece of media we have. I don't know if anyone else believes that or disagrees, but you can argue with the wall. Hey.
I agree.
I also, starting here, I'm going to be keeping this as spoiler-free as we possibly can, so I won't be going into detail with anything that basically isn't talked about within the first, hour of the game. So anything beyond that is something that will not be talked about. Otherwise, I don't want to spoil anything for any new people coming into this. I highly recommend watching a playthrough if you don't want to watch the HBO show, although the HBO adaptation is probably one of the best game-to-TV adaptations I've ever seen. I'm looking directly at you, Resident Evil.
For reference, by the way, the first hour of the game is probably equivalent to the first 20 or 30 minutes of the show.
Yes, everything that I'm going to be talking about can be watched within the first episode as well. So, wanting to put that out there. I'm going to keep it as spoiler-free, though, as possible. Because a blind entry to this is by far the best kind of way to introduce yourself to this. So.
Absolutely. All right, let's do it.
Flashing spoiler warning from this point forward, I guess. So, now it's time to talk about the main story. Or at least the main key points that we're going to talk about before we get into dissecting everything. So, The Last of Us follows 2 main people. We have Joel and we have Ellie. Those are both names that you're going to hear a lot throughout this video. I also am going to be putting pictures of them next to us, in between us, so you guys know who we're talking about. These are all important people, so just so you know. The Last of Us also is an apocalyptic story, as we talked about. It follows the fungal infestation, which I think is pretty cool. Usually, I would say zombie or infection-based media usually follows kind of like a virus, usually. So fungus is scary, terrifying.
It's a new one.
Especially when this infection is very real. And scarily enough, it's real in our lives. It's actually, as Spoons pointed out, something we can eat. So if you all know the word cordyceps, it is a type of fungal infection or fungus. Um, right now, all that we know is that it affects ants, at least in...
So this is something I found out, actually. Sorry, I'm interrupting.
No, go ahead.
Cordyceps is I think it's a genus, but there are a bunch of different species of cordyceps, and every species of cordyceps infects a different type of insect. So the one that they base the game and the show on is based on the one that infects ants, but there are like a bunch that infect all different types of insects, which is horrifying. I think it's one of the scariest things I've ever learned about that like actually exists.
Yeah. It's terrifying, especially if you do go look up what cordyceps does to ants specifically.
There's a video. It's so weird.
Yeah, it's terrifying. But one thing that I love is that we have a specific date. It's called The Last of Us or Outbreak Day, September 26, 2013. It's celebrated in the Last of Us community every year, which I think is pretty cool. I also think it's pretty cool that the show and obviously the game are based in the year 2023. So the outbreak happens in 2013, but the main storyline that we watch takes place throughout the year of 2023 and afterwards. So
in the show they did it differently though, I think.
It is slightly different, yeah.
It's 2003. I think. So it's like a 10-year difference, which is interesting, but
yeah, I just thought that was pretty interesting. Some basic info on Joel and Ellie, because those are our main besties. Joel, after the outbreak, is a smuggler and a QZ. A QZ is a quarantine zone, which is led by Fedra. So Fedra is kind of what the government is after outbreak. I apologize if this gets a little bit confusing. I'm throwing a lot of words at you right now, so if this gets confusing, just take a minute. And I will try to explain things as best I can, as detailed as possible.
Also, another note, for the whole morality and ethics conversation of this, you don't really need to know who anybody is.
No, this is just me spewing.
We're just talking about The Last of Us because it's cool.
Yeah. But Ellie is a 14-year-old. She was actually born after the outbreak, which I think is very important because obviously you see the difference between Joel, who canonically we now know is around 56 around the time that he meets Ellie.
Old.
Anyways.
Doesn't mean I won't hit it though. Doesn't mean I won't hit it. Age is a number.
Absolutely. I'm above 18. Pedro. Anyways.
Hit me up, man.
Ellie is 14. She's born after the outbreak. It's not kind of important unless you go into DLC, because there is a DLC between part 1 and part 2 called Left Behind. I will talk about that a little bit later in Morality Land. And for reasons shown in the game, I will not be telling you what they are because it is important if you play or watch the show. Joel's tasked with helping kind of escort cargo, and in this case cargo is Ellie, to move across the USA to a rebellion group that is known as the Fireflies. So Fireflies are kind of the opposite of Fedra. Again, not super important, but if those words come up later, I just want you to know what they are. So, these are some key points to know. This is when I'm going to talk about spoilers, because it is important when it talks about Joel and Ellie. In literally, I would say maybe the first 20-30 minutes of the game during the initial outbreak, we are introduced to Joel's daughter. Her name is Sarah. She is... I don't know if we canonically have an age for her, I just know that she is around the same age as Ellie. So between the ages of like 13 to 16. I see you looking that up. I don't know if there is a canonic age. If it is, it's around Ellie's age. But during the night of the outbreak...
she's 14. They're the same
14, age. So same age.
12. Wait. She's 12 in the game. I think she's 14.
14 in the show?
14 in the show, 12 in the game.
Okay, so I was close.
I think.
It's never like, at least I'm not sure it's 100% stated in the game or the show. I mean... But, either way.
She's a tween.
She's a tween. She's around Ellie's age. But during the night of the outbreak, they are scrambling to try to get out of the city, which is Austin, Texas. I just have too much information on the show. Some of this really has no point in being talked about, so sorry. But they're
The
trying to
point in
get out of
talking
Austin.
about it is that you get to talk about it.
Yeah, I'm really just getting to talk about one of my favorite things ever. So they're trying to get out of the city, which is Austin, and while they are escaping, they're trying to make their way around the military, because the military is trying to basically quarantine everyone, make sure the infection does not spread. But while doing so, there is a really heartbreaking scene. I will put it here. For those
No,
of you
you're gonna put the clip in?
I am gonna put the clip in because it does.
Oh, that's evil.
It's effective. So anyone who has watched the show, I'm sorry. Anyone who hasn't watched the show or the game, I'm also sorry.
This
So
is
I'm gonna
evil.
put that here.
It's okay, baby. We're safe. We're safe. Hey, we need help.
Stop!
Please. It's my daughter. I think her leg is broken.
Stop right there!
Okay. We're not sick.
Got a couple of civilians in the outer perimeter. Please advise.
Daddy, what about Uncle Tommy?
We're gonna get you to safety and go back for him, okay?
Sir, there's a little girl. But... Yes, sir.
Somebody, we've just been through hell. Okay, we just need... Shit. Please don't. Oh, no. Sarah. Move your hands, baby. I know, baby, I know. Listen to me. I know this hurts, baby. You're gonna be okay, baby. Stay with me. All right, I'm gonna pick you up. I know, baby. I know it hurts. Come on, baby. Please. I know, baby. I know. Sarah. Baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Don't do this to me, baby. Come on. No. No. No, 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 no. Please. 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 Please don't. Please.
Again,
Are you crying
apologies.
yet?
I'm sorry if you are crying. But I don't know. Ooh, should I put the show or should I put the game? Well, I'll figure that out later.
Yeah.
Anyways, apologies if you cried during that. It is a difficult scene to watch, especially when you just spent the last 20 minutes not really knowing much about these people, but you spend a lot of time with Sarah, and especially in the show, you are given a lot more time to connect with Sarah as a character, and then she is completely ripped from us as viewers and players.
It's brutal.
And also Joel, which it's so sad. It's really like, even now I cried watching the show. I still get emotional when I play the game. So
Dude, I can't talk about it anymore. We gotta move on. I
Yeah,
can't
we're
think about it.
moving
I'm
on.
just like, it just keeps replaying in my mind. I can't do it.
So the only reason that's important is because it obviously plays into why Joel is so emotionally charged when it comes to topics around Ellie. And then we have kind of what I consider to be Ellie's kind of big thing that triggers a lot of her emotions, which is not only was she born after the outbreak, but she also didn't really have a lot of people close to her. She was, I'm not sure, it's different in the game, and I don't know what we're going to be told in the show. But her mother either passed away or was, like, abandoned her after she was born, so she doesn't know her family. She was kind of given to Fedra or the Fireflies. Again, don't really know which ones are going to be told in the game or the show, but she's given up essentially to one of the groups, and when she grows up, she ends up having a really close friend to her called Riley. This is information that you find out from The Last of Us Left Behind, which is the DLC. And Riley gets infected, and unfortunately Ellie is the one who has to make sure she doesn't turn. So that is also a hard scene. I won't be playing that one just because it's not really, it's a playable part of the DLC, so it's not something I can really show. I don't know. Also just, anyways, skipping past that. So, those are just the key points for like some reasons as to why Ellie and Joel do things the way that they do. So, awesome. Now is the fun part where we get to pick apart psyche and morality.
Yeah.
So, obviously at the beginning of this episode, I talked about why I think The Last of Us is probably the best, if not one of the best, representations of an apocalyptic scenario. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but I think the main one is just how realistic it is that they humanize absolutely everyone in the game, including the infected. So there are some enemies, obviously, like clickers. Those are pretty infamous around the city, or around the franchise. But there's also, they're called runners, but they're kind of like the baseline infected. And the thing that I kind of enjoy about their design as enemies in the game is they're also humanized. So they aren't, rotting and deteriorating or whatever. At least in the game. In the show, they are a little bit more, messed up, a little bit icky. But in the game, they're just people. Like, they're just people that are affected by this, fungal infection and infestation. So I think having villains that are humanized or enemies that are humanized makes it a little bit more difficult to kind of give justice to the characters that you're playing, because obviously when you play a game, the whole entire point is to have a protagonist and root for the protagonist till the end. But I think here it's a very good representation of not every protagonist is going to necessarily be the good guy. So
the game also does a really good job of like forcing you into their shoes and forcing you to make really hard decisions, which I love about that. Like, there's a lot of like games where it's just like you make a decision and it doesn't really have a lot of bearing, but like in this game, everything you do matters, and like
absolutely.
you feel the consequences of all your actions.
And some of them aren't necessarily choices you get to make, but are just choices you experience the characters making.
Yeah.
And you have this kind of feeling of, I get it. Like, I'm not, some people would be mad, if these characters did these actions to other people, but you kind of just sit in this feeling of like, I'm not upset either way. Like, I understand why they're choosing to do these things, even though in, our time, it's insane to even question or think about these things, but I think it's just, it's
Yeah.
there's a lot of nuance in this game, so apologies if they're kind of open-ended talking points, but that brings you guys into the conversation.
I feel like part of this episode is going to be asking a lot of like hypothetical questions, and we're not going to find the answers to a lot of them.
Oh yeah,
like it's just going to be a lot of questions that we just don't, we do not know the answers until we're literally in that scenario. So,
and I feel like that's what makes this such an incredible piece of art. There's no way for you to have there is a definitive storyline, but there's no way for you to kind of put an end to anything. Like, even in the games, there's not a strict ending to either the first game or the second game. There's an end to the game, but there's no, like, there's no closure. There's no closure, and I can see why that can be a struggle for some people who enjoy like storyline video games, but I think it plays into the realism. Like, there's no way for closure in real life a lot of the time. And when we do get it, are we ever satisfied with it? So
yeah.
Anyways,
we're gonna get deep.
We are getting very
oh my gosh,
deep,
our show is called #deep.
Yeah.
Now me forgetting the name of our own podcast.
This is going into episode 4 of the show. I'm not going to talk about it in super depth, but there are other enemies that aren't infected. So there are raiders, there are, other humans that are just trying to survive, and ambushers. And episode 4 of the show that just came out last week, I think plays very big into that, as I believe, I don't know if Neil Druckmann was the director of that episode. However, I know he was, he's obviously the creative director and the creator of the game. Shout out to Neil Druckmann.
Love of my life.
And also, oh gosh, Uno Momento. I can't remember his name. Bruce Straley and Neil Druckmann are the game directors.
Shout out to Gustavo too. He's got nothing to do
Oh,
with
yeah,
this,
oh,
but
Gustavo has so much
stellar
to do with it.
music.
He, Gustavo Santaolalla? I'm so sorry, Gustavo, if I mispronounced that. He's an
Yeah,
Argentinian sound director and musician.
He's so good.
Oh my god, he did an amazing job doing all of the music for this game. It is
And the
it
show
is
now,
amazing. Mm-hmm. He also is the composer for the show, and so much love for that man.
Oh,
Okay, I
yeah.
can't find his name. I will put it on the screen. But he is the creative director for the show. He is also doing such an amazing job to bringing this show to life. And also, there are things that are changing about the show that are not the same in the game, and I will talk about those more after. The differences between the show and the game, because there are some things that a lot of people are not happy about, and not necessarily the huge fans of things changing, because they wanted it to be 100%, you know, game to show, but there are just some things that had to be changed for continuity, and I think the fact that they changed those things but still made it completely true to the story of the game, and people like me who have followed this game for over a decade now, like, being able to sit there and be like, this looks like you're playing it, I think that's insane. So shout out to that whole team of people working on the show and the game.
Yeah, and fuck the haters.
So, also, yes, anyone who hates The Last of Us,
Why are you here?
I'm
No,
the
like that's a
CEO.
genuine question. Like, why are you watching this episode?
That's true. Why are you here?
I mean, like,
Leave a
welcome.
comment in the comment section below. Give us interaction. Anyways.
We just want to know your thoughts. All right, let's keep.
This is an open invitation to anyone watching this, hater or lover of this series. I'd love to hear everyone's opinions on the show. How do you think they're doing? Or what are some things that you want to see in the show that you don't know if you'll get? Opinions on it already being renewed for a season 2, despite only having 2 episodes out at that time when it was announced that it was being renewed. So,
Give us your
Love
thoughts in the
that.
comments below.
yes, give us comments. I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts.
Subscribe. That's what we're supposed to do, right?
As YouTubers, absolutely.
All right. Just
Okay.
keep it rolling.
So, morally gray characters. We're gonna go into that for a little bit. I am a huge fan, and I think a great example of that is Joel Miller. He, as a character, even aside from Pedro, but Joel Miller is I think perfectly portrayed as a morally gray character. I think having those specific struggles, like losing your daughter, you know, already as the world is ending, for all he knows, I think both of those things are synonymous almost. You know, he has no family other than Sarah. He has Tommy, but, you know, other than that, he's alone. And so losing Sarah, I think that already was him losing his world. So,
Absolutely.
as you guys saw in the scene that I played for you, the emotional turmoil that man has faced, only to be brought back to that over a decade later. I think in the game it's 20 years, where he meets Ellie, and he's immediately brought back to losing Sarah. Immediately brought back, because they're not the same, but the spark is there. And I think it was enough to bring Joel back to a point of like, I have one opportunity to try to almost redeem myself. And I think, especially with other things that happen in the game, which I can't talk about, but Spoons knows what I'm talking about, he has to make this choice at some point where, does he go with what he wants to do, or does he go with what he needs to do? And that choice, in general, I think the choice between what you want and what you need in a situation like this is already hard enough. I mean, you have to fight for survival every day.
Mm-hmm.
But now you have to take into consideration how you're feeling and not necessarily how you're surviving.
Yeah.
And I think that switch flips for Joel at a certain point in the game where he's like, you know what? I can't just try to survive anymore and get by, because now it's almost like he has a reason. He has a reason again. And I think that is what leads him to do the things that he does in the game and the things that he does after the game. But yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well, because I know you're a little bit more newer to this than I am, and I have a hard time talking about this because I know a lot more that I can't really talk about, especially when I'm trying to do this with no spoilers. But yeah, I want to hear your thoughts as well.
Well, I mean, like, I think you're right. Like, Joel is a very morally great character, and even like, I think you could put anybody in that position that he's in and come out with a morally great character, because like, it doesn't, I mean, I don't want to say it doesn't matter that Joel's daughter died, because obviously like that shapes a lot of how he interacts with Ellie.
Mm-hmm.
But I think anyone who goes through, like, you're tasked with bringing this girl across the country, you grow incredibly close, and then like, you know, you're faced with all these choices along the way, and you have that battle inside of you between what you want and what you need to do. And like, anyone in that position would have a hard time.
Mm-hmm.
And like, I think like it's really easy to put yourself in his shoes, I think, because like, yes, you're literally playing as him, so there's that, but like, it's really easy to imagine yourself in that position, because we've all done that. I feel like even now, like, none of us are living in the apocalypse, but like, we've all had times where we've had to make choices that, like, you want to do something but you know you should be doing something else, like,
Or even not
how do you make that choice?
taking that out of the apocalypse as well. Like some of the choices that he has to make throughout the game and and obviously the show as well, is you could take those outside of an apocalypse. Those are still decisions that some people have to make anyways, even though they're not being chased by mushroom boys. You know?
Fungal boys.
Like fun guys.
He's a pretty fun guy.
But I just think that the people that created this story, especially the people at the forefront, so obviously Neil is a huge proponent of this, but also everyone that portrayed the characters in game did it perfectly.
Yeah.
And one of my main concerns going into the show was the casting, because I didn't know how it was going to turn out casting wise. Especially because I have such a deep love for the franchise that seeing two actors, both of which I had no idea who they were. I'm so sorry, Pedro, I didn't know who you were until after.
I'm really ashamed to admit that.
I
as
am
well.
very ashamed, honestly.
Better late than never, though, right?
Exactly. We're here now, so. But going into this, seeing two actors that I had no idea anything about, especially with having such a strong connection with Troy Baker and Ashley Johnson, which are the people that portray Ellie and Joel in the game, it's so hard to almost take yourself out and align that they're the same people. My biggest fear was that they weren't going to be able to do it in a way that you see both of them and both of them are Joel and Ellie. Because obviously Troy Baker, Ashley Johnson, those are people that have been Ellie and Joel since 2013. And I think they did it really well. I think Pedro
agree.
plays an amazing Joel. I think Bella Ramsey plays an amazing Ellie. And now that I'm actually like watching the show, I don't know who else I would have cast for those roles.
For sure.
Also, shout out to Jeffrey Pierce. We saw you in episode 4. I had a mental
yeah.
breakdown because I heard Tommy, but did not see him, and so I was very confused. If you guys don't know, Jeffrey Pierce is the voice and the capture for Tommy in the game, and obviously he was not cast as Tommy in the show due to just... I've talked with Spoons about this, but if they were to cast Pedro Pascal and Jeffrey Pierce, they do not look like brothers, so it would not Wouldn't have
made
worked.
sense.
No, but I think it really is great casting. We've moved away from morals. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, let's talk about
Back
morals.
to morals.
Back to morals.
One thing I did want to bring up was in episode 4, there is a specific scene that happens where Ellie has to do something. Again, trying to not be spoilers, but Ellie has to go through a very, very hard scene, and she's kind of forced to process that by herself because Joel is, I don't think,
Emotionally
mentally
unavailable.
capable. Yeah, I don't think he's emotionally capable of comforting her at that point, and there specifically the scene of she goes away for a second and Joel tells her to leave and does what he does, and you see Ellie process it within 30 seconds. She has this frame of 30 seconds where she cries and you can see her silently having this like panic attack. And then she hears Joel coming and the tears are wiped away and she's fine. Everything's turned off, and I think that's one of the first moments where you actually see how similar Ellie and Joel are in like the way that they process things. Because
Yeah.
obviously it wasn't easy for either of them. Especially with the way that scene was done. Like, again, humanizing of these people that are not supposed to be people that we like. But I think they did a great job with that as well. But
Morals.
morals.
Ethics. Let's talk about that.
Ethics. So,
Moving kind of
Skipping-
away from The Last of Us and more into hypotheticals.
Yes, we are gonna talk about moral struggles here. So obviously we have the two hypotheticals of good versus bad and nature versus nurture. I think those things go hand in hand, in my opinion. Because nature versus nurture kind of talks about how good and bad are those things that we learn, or are those things that we're inherently born with. And I have my own opinions on both of those things, but I'm gonna talk about them as unbiased as possible, just to kind of have the conversation. Or maybe I guess I could talk about it in opinions, but
Yeah, I think you can.
I personally think that it's a mixture of both.
I agree.
I think it's a little bit too restrictive to kind of say that good and bad people are only learned or born a certain way. I think there's definitely some people that are born into situations that, you know, shape them and mold them as people. But I also think that there are people that are born, you know, a little fucked up, if I'm being honest. And I think Apocalypse, but also just in general, when you're faced with a significant trauma or a significant consequence, there's always the question of how does that change your perspective? If you consider yourself to be a good person, how does those things change you being a good person? Do you stay a good person after those things? Do you know, let's talk back to Joel, who lost his daughter. If Joel's a good person, which we see him as a very, you know, caring guy, a very loving father, a very, you know, compassionate person, of someone who's obviously very stressed, but does whatever he can to keep his daughter happy, or at least as much as he can.
As much as
Seeing-
you can remember to.
Yeah. You know, when you're faced with the apocalypse, which I know is a big situation, but how can you keep the promise to yourself that you're going to be a good person? And again, that's hypothetical. I don't think there is an answer for that. I don't think there's a reply for that, but I think that was my big question, was you're faced with this impossible scenario that isn't really impossible, and how do you stick to what you consider to be your morals?
Yeah.
Or like, can your morals change? Which I think absolutely your morals can change.
Yes, 100%.
But I think morals just in general,
I've
They're
got so many thoughts on
fluid.
I got so many thoughts on this. I'm waiting.
Yeah.
I'm waiting for my moment.
and finally, before I let spoons go off and be insane, no, I'm kidding. Before that, my last thing that I wanted to bring up was, is being a good person something that is inherited, right?
Mhm.
Let's say you have people in your family, you're born into a mafia or something. Can you still be a good person while being surrounded by people that aren't considered to be good people? But that's also a question in itself of like,
How do you consider good and bad?
yeah, how do they consider themselves? They might consider themselves great people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because in their world, their morals are just. Their morals are justified. They have reasons for those things. So how can you tell them that they're bad when in their world, they're just doing what they think is right?
Yeah.
Mic drop. I don't know. That's
Sorry,
just,
I'm adding a
again,
note for myself.
lots of hypotheticals, but I think they're all things that are talked about in The Last of Us, especially, I would say almost more so in the second game. I think morality is talked about more in the second game than the first, but it's definitely still a very apparent thing in the first game. But what about you? What are your
All right,
thoughts?
I got so many thoughts. So again, like a lot of my like notes on this were very hypothetical questions of like, in an apocalyptic scenario, like where is your moral line now? And like I just like, for those listening or watching, I just want you to think of like, what's your moral line right now? Like what is something, like where does your morality like stop? What becomes, where is immorality in your mind? Like what is across that line for you? And like picture that in your mind. Like for me, it's like this is really obvious. I'm sure this is across most of our moral lines, is like murdering someone. Like that's immoral for me. I would never do that right now. But in an apocalyptic scenario, does your moral
or if you're
line
just faced with it.
Yeah, or if you're faced with it, like does your moral line shift? Will murder be acceptable? Will you find a way to justify it? Like how far are you willing to go? Is your moral line permanently in the place that it is right now?
Mm-hmm.
I think that's fascinating to think about. Just a little thought experiment for you guys.
I think that, like, in my mind, if I think about it in like a physical sense, what I think about is there's literally just a line in the sand. And I feel like the more you get up to that line, the less that line is more pronounced.
Yeah, that's a good
Where
point
it's like
too.
you're faced with it over and over and over again. Eventually, every time you step on that line, you're rubbing it away every single
Yeah.
time.
That's a really good point.
I think that's at least the way that I think about it. It's like,
No, that's an amazing like,
obviously
analogy.
you hit that wall once and you're like, absolutely not. Then you hit it again and you're like,
Well,
I really
can,
want
maybe
to.
I can move it a little bit, you know?
Yeah. Or, you know, not this time, but you're already thinking
Yeah.
about if you got a reason to, you would.
Yeah. Like, and that's like the next note I have is like, in any situation when you do something immoral, chances are you will find a way in your mind to justify it.
Well, I think
And
that's
and
how
then your
criminals
line,
work.
yeah, and then your line keeps shifting. Like if I murder someone and I'm like, well, they did so and so to me, so therefore it was morally acceptable. Then
Right.
who's to say it's gonna stop me from doing that to someone else because they slighted me in some small way? Like we're always gonna find a way to justify immoral actions. And like if you put any of this into an apocalyptic scenario, imagine how easy it is to justify any of the things you would consider immoral right now. Like stealing things. It would be so easy to justify stealing from a store in the apocalypse. Like, I need this stuff to survive, and soon money is gonna have no value. Like,
It already has no value.
well, yeah, but like in an
Shout out
apocalypse,
to
like,
Bill.
shout out to Bill. But like,
We steal from Home Depot.
no, for sure. But like, there is always gonna be a way to justify things in the apocalypse, and that doesn't necessarily make them moral. It just means that like you're gonna find a way to justify it. And so like, think about that in your mind, just like a little thought experiment for you of like, how far would you be willing to go?
Well, and it's also, what are other people's morals?
Oh,
I think
for
that
sure.
plays into things as well, because some people consider lying to be immoral.
Mm-hmm.
And so it almost is like, if you break someone else's morals, does that give them reason to break
Yeah.
theirs?
That's good. That's a good point. Something I was thinking about too is like the trolley problem, which if you don't know is this the idea that like you have
I'll put one up for you guys. For
it's
if you
it's
want
about
visual.
like there's one person on a track versus 5 people laying on a track, and right now the train is going towards the 5 people, but you have you're like operating a lever that could switch it to kill the 1 person. Do you kill the 5 people or the 1 people? 1 person, 1 people.
Well,
The 1
there's also
person?
like different complex
there's
versions
different
of
there's
it where
different
it's like,
versions.
oh, there's 5 people, but all of them are above the age of 80.
Yeah.
And then there's 1 person that's 18. Do you kill the elderly people because they're already close to dying anyways, or
Yeah.
do you kill the one person even though they're young because it's one versus five. It's like
Yeah.
it helps you to kind of, I don't know if it helps you, but
No,
it causes you to think about it.
It makes you think about your morals for sure. But I was thinking about that and like if it took like let's say there's an apocalyptic scenario where somehow like killing some people would cause the apocalypse to no longer be happening. Like you had to like there was a vaccine and like you know they needed the DNA of so and so number of people, but all those people had to die in order for them to get a vaccine. How many people would it take for you to no longer be willing to do that? Is it just one person? Is it 10 people? Is
There's
it 10,000
also-
people? Like
There's also the thought of like, you don't know how many people are still alive.
that's true, yeah.
Like, sure, you might save the world, but what if
Yeah.
the only people left to save are just the people with you?
Yeah. And like at what point do the ends no longer justify the means? Of like, is killing one person worth it to save the world? Is killing 10,000 people worth it to save the world? Like, these are the kind of things you'd have to think about in an apocalyptic. Oh, I'm having so much fun.
I think it's not even an apocalyptic scenario because that's how we already consider a lot of vaccines.
That's yeah.
COVID.
Oh yeah.
I mean, not to be like very bleak, but it took how many people dying before people started taking the pandemic seriously?
I mean, they still don't.
Exactly.
I want you all
So-
to know there's still a pandemic happening.
Oh yeah, we are still within a
We're
global
s-
pandemic.
We're still in a pandemic. I don't care what anyone says. And
There
if
are
you're
still
not-
people actively dying from COVID and
That's
now
true.
long COVID as well, which is a new official diagnostic.
Yep. So it's still happening, just so you know. Anyway, here's a question for you, Apple, and for
Okay.
our audience as well. Which would greater increase your chances of survival? Being a moral person or being an immoral person? Now, again, those terms are very subjective, so you have to think about that too. Of like, where's your morality line?
I think that's a rhetorical question because
I mean, it can be, but
to me,
also like,
if I say immoral, what if the immorals, like what makes it an immoral or not?
right, exactly, and like you
Because
gotta
what
think
if
about that
my
too.
morals are going to be different from yours? So
Yeah.
if I say being immoral will grant you a greater chance of survival,
But all
the
you mean
morals
is
that I
lying
don't
to people.
consider
Right.
exactly,
Yep,
because like
it's a fascinating question.
it is because how do you consider someone else being moral or immoral? Because it's all based off of your own perspective.
For sure.
That's a funky question. I
That
kind of
is
like
a funky
that.
question. It's a good one.
That's a TikTok question.
Oh, for sure.
I want to hear everyone else's thoughts on that.
Here's another one. So let's say everybody in the world thinks murder is immoral. Let's just make that boundary for this hypothetical situation. Everyone thinks murder is bad and it's very immoral and we all hate it. What circumstances would force you to compromise that moral standing? Like, what would have to happen in order for you to murder someone? Would it just be like, I have to murder this person in order to survive? Because in that case, then I feel like there's probably a lot of people that could justify killing someone in order to save themselves.
Yeah.
But could you justify them if you could get away from this person, still be fine and not have to murder them, but murdering them would allow you to live a better life, would you do it then?
No.
If that person killed someone that you love,
Yes.
could you justify murdering them then? Like, what circumstances would make you murder someone
I
if
don't
we all
think
thought murder was bad?
FBI, don't listen to this. This is all hypothetical. I think survival, that is a reason. In my opinion. I think because if I think it's fine to keep myself to be able to survive for myself.
Well, here's the
obviously-
thing too. We have an innate desire to live. Like, just a huge aspect of humanity is the desire to be alive. And so if it takes killing someone in order to preserve ourselves, I think that's a very human thing to do.
That's what I was going to talk about is if I think it's something that I would do to survive, the chances of someone else doing that to me are also high.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the chances of like, we're both probably going to try to kill each other.
Right.
So I'm simply just not going to waste my time trying to think about it too hard. If someone
Yeah.
comes at me, I don't have the time to think about that choice.
Yeah. You're not gonna sit on your ass if someone comes and attacks you.
No.
But then you also have
Absolutely
to
not.
think about the scenario of like, what if they're not attacking you? What if, but you have to kill them anyway in order to survive?
How would you know if you have to or not? Without
I don't know.
there
It's just an
being
interesting
a
hypothetical. It's just an interesting hypothetical.
I'm just answering your hypothetical with another
here's
question.
a good one. If you somehow had heard about this person that has been going around killing a lot of people, and you know they're a very dangerous person, and somehow you happen across them sleeping in the woods,
Yes.
do you kill them?
Yes.
There you go. Like,
Sorry.
I mean, like, that's just, you know.
If we're in the apocalypse, I don't have the time to wake you up and interrogate you.
Right. And that goes to my next point too, actually. This connects really well into the next thing I
Okay.
want to talk about. Is like harm caused versus harm prevented. Like if you commit an immoral act, but it prevents more harm from being caused,
Yeah.
like, do you consider that morally acceptable?
I think yes.
Like, if
But
you
then-
murder one person and it stops the murder of 10 other people, is it morally acceptable to murder that one person?
I think
It's
yes.
back
but-
to the trolley problem. We're back to the trolley problem.
Yeah, I think yes, but that also raises the question of how it's a question of like we don't know.
Mm-hmm.
We as humans do not have the answer to these questions, and so basing it off of what we think we would do is impossible. Because
That's
I'm
true,
sitting
yeah.
here telling you, "Oh yeah, if I had to do it for my survival, I would do it," but I don't know.
We're not in
I
a
could
survival
get-
situation. We
Exactly,
literally
I could
not
be in that
say.
situation and completely freeze, and I'd be dead. Well, I mean,
Hmm.
if the apocalypse happened, I would be dead. I would
Oh, yeah. No,
unaliving
I'm dying.
myself
I'm
within...
dying.
Goodbye.
Yep, I'm gone. I'm a goner.
I'm not living through that. I'm sorry for everyone who's like, how long do you think you'd live through the zombie apocalypse? I wouldn't. I would off
No, I
myself
would-
as soon as I saw it.
Yeah.
Apologies,
I just like
but
realistically, I know I wouldn't survive, and therefore,
I
like,
wouldn't.
I would.
I
Just,
would be a part of the mass amounts of people that would die within the first like week. I have
disabled,
no
so, like-
chances. Yeah, we're both disabled. We have no
we got
chance of
nothing.
surviving. Maybe
Like,
if I had Pedro, but no.
I need a service dog to go to the store. Like I am
Exactly.
not
I
living,
have
I'm
social
not
anxiety.
surviving.
You think I'm gonna be okay with zombies? Absolutely
No, seriously.
But-
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I would say in that hypothetical, yeah. I think if I'm preventing the harm of a lot of other people, but then again, we don't know. We don't know if that harm is actually going to happen. If it's just thoughts,
Right.
if it's something that, you know, how much can you trust someone's word is, I think, another
Yeah.
thing that a lot of people don't really think about because we trust these people, but how far does trust go in survivable situations?
Yeah. Ooh. Yeah, that's a good topic too. Here's some food for thought. And this
Yeah.
doesn't really have to do with like a hypothetical question. This is just more something for you to think about. Sometimes the laws we have in place are the only things holding people back.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like that's just I don't even want to like go into detail about that, but like just think
What
about
you're
that.
thinking about right now is probably true.
Yeah. And I mean
It's
like there was
we're talking about exactly what you're thinking about.
right. Yeah. I don't think we need to explain.
No.
So here's another thing to think about is like selflessness, right? Because there's a lot of people in the world who are very focused on helping other people and creating a better world or whatever. Realistically, how selfless can you be in a post-apocalyptic world?
I don't think you can be at all.
Yeah.
I think
I mean,
you
like-
have to be inherently selfish to be able to survive in situations because if you are completely selfless and you think about other people before you, that is already you're starting yourself off on the wrong foot, in my opinion.
Which then goes back to our question of like, would being moral or immoral greater increase your chances of survival?
If selflessness is your moral, I think you need to reevaluate your morals then.
That's true. I think that's a good point. Like I feel like
The only even in
I-
not survival situations,
Yeah.
I think selfishness is needed.
I have great admiration for people who wish they could be selfless, but I think like again, it goes back to that like preservation thing, like that human instinct to preserve yourself. Like you need some of that. I'm just saying,
yeah.
like in order to be a human being, you need a little bit of selfishness just to
And I think
to
a lot of
live.
people who consider themselves not to be selfish actually do have selfishness inside them, but it's
A lot of people are selfless for selfish intent,
Oh yeah. It's almost like
which sounds
self-preservation.
confusing. confusing. It sounds confusing, but like what I'm trying to say is like there's a lot of people who will act selfless to make themselves feel better about themselves.
I think there's a time and place to be selfless, but I think if you're basing your entire life around that fact about yourself,
That time and
it's
place is
very
not the
dangerous.
apocalypse.
Oh
too.
no. No, the time and place is not
Not
after
the
the world is
apocalypse.
ending.
Here's just a bunch of hypothetical questions. I think I'll just read through this. Is morality even that important?
No, I'm gonna answer
Now-
with one-word answers.
Hear me out. We look at things through a moral lens because we currently live in a society that places doing the right thing very high on the totem pole. When that society collapses, why should it matter? Do questions of morality even have any standing? If you subscribe to a religious worldview, perhaps they may, but if not, then what bearing does morality even have on you after the society holding you to those standards disappears?
Yeah. I mean,
Food
I
for
think
thought.
I think we already see that though in present time.
That's true, yeah.
Like, especially this is just because I've been watching the docu-series on it, but the corruption of the Hillsong Church, the mega church in New York, there were so many vulnerable people that went to that church, not only because like, oh, it's, you know, a new age church, it's like the concert, like pop song kind of church, it's
Right.
you know, celebrities go there, so obviously they must be doing something right, but then you had all the things coming out about the preachers there and even just the institution and how it was based, and if you have any intrigue about that, just go watch the docu-series on it, because that's a whole episode in itself, in all honesty. But the amount of people who were lost after that church basically disbanded, I think that proves to us that a lot of people only live the way that they live because they're being told to do so, or because they're being molded and shaped to do things in a specific way. And so once you lose that leading, and once you lose that person that is being your moral guide, essentially, what happens? Because, I
Yeah.
mean, to be honest, we're all taught morals, whether we think about it or not. We can shape ourselves, but if you think about it, I mean, think about it in this way. Why do you have the morals that you do? If you think very deeply about that, how did they come to be? Was it your parents that told you? Was it the people or the things that you saw online that made you think more about it and create your own opinion? Like, I don't think there is any way that we have morals just because we thought of them. There has to be something that brought those up in us, that made us start thinking about it, that made us shape those morals for ourselves. And if we take that away, what happens to us?
Right.
Like, you lose a parent. What does that do to your morality? What does that change about you? I know it changed a lot about me. Losing my dad, it changed a ton of things that I thought about the world.
For sure.
I don't know. That's my response.
No,
to
I
that.
think there's also like that other aspect of like, yes, you're losing, like, so we're saying like a post-apocalyptic world, the society that shaped your morals collapses. But then we see this in The Last of Us. You have a bunch of different almost factions, and they all have different morals.
Oh yeah.
And then you have a new moral lens to look at the world through. And like,
You have a compare and contrast system
for
almost.
sure. And like, I think that's fascinating to me, of like, how quickly would you be able to switch up your morals to fit into a group?
Also,
Like,
that
that's
just led another question to me of like, if you initially join a group because you think one of their morals is right, how long does it take for one moral that you agree with to become all of yours?
This is
like,
like this is how cults work too.
Yeah.
Like, this is how like
You agree with one
Cult-
thing, how
yeah.
long does it take before that one thing turns into your entire beliefs?
well, because that's how like cults work, is they get you to believe one small thing that seems inconsequential, and then the more small things you believe, the more they can get you to believe the big things. And like, I
It
just
gives
think
you
like
reason to believe the big things.
it would be so easy for like for your morals to just completely transform in a world where everybody's morals are different from each other's.
Well, I think that especially is talked about. This won't make sense to any of you guys, but for people that know Last of Us Part 2, I think that's shown a lot with the WLF soldiers.
For sure.
Again, it doesn't make sense to the first part of the game, but they're another kind of rebellion group that comes after the first game. And I think that's probably the best example we have of like a lot of people with a lot of different morals all coming together because there's at least one thing that binds them together.
And then
And
you
I
have
think-
the opposite of that too, of like this kind of faux religious society in the
Oh yeah,
Seraphites.
the Seraphites, yeah.
Yeah.
I love the Seraphites.
And like the contrast between the WLF and the Seraphites, like I think just that's like an incredible example of everything we've just been talking about, of how
yeah.
easy it is for your morals to change in
And-
that type of situation.
It's incredible. It's incredible.
Oh.
It is. Yeah, and again, in the second game, both of them are humanized. Both of them, you learn more about them. You learn why they are the way that they are, and then all of a sudden, it's like, I don't really hate these guys. I hate them
Right.
because their voice lines are annoying, and I have to keep fighting them every 5 seconds. But like, I don't have a reason to be killing all of them because
Right.
they're just doing what they're believing in. In all honesty, the only reason why they're coming after us is because we are fighting them first.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're just, all of us are just trying to survive, and the reason why we're all fighting each other is because we all want to survive.
Yep.
Ugh.
All right, my last
Trolley
little
problem.
I know, my last little hypothetical question goes back to like, does morality matter? In shows where the apocalypse, or shows or games where the apocalypse is based, I guess in like a real life scenario, if we were in the apocalypse, if there was like a zombie apocalypse or like an infection based apocalypse, like The Last of Us, is our morality then just an attempt to separate the survivors from the infected? Like, is it just a way to make us feel good about ourselves?
I think humans in nature have this inherent need to separate good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we lose what we first thought was good and evil, aka, you know, people have specific biases, or, you know, people are racist and blah, 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 and then eventually those morals have to be morphed because now you're reliant on the people that you once hated.
Right.
But we have to find a new common enemy.
Mhm.
It's like there's a whole thing of like trauma bonding over a common enemy, and like I think that's how we shape those things. We go from like, obviously these guys are bad because they're trying to kill us, but then there's the other part of they're not doing it because they want to.
Right.
It's we go after them because we want to survive, but then again,
Yep.
they're just trying to survive too. They're just doing what they know.
Yep.
And if you want to go even further to that, like the cordyceps infection in general is a parasite. It infects your brain. It controls your entire neurological system. So then you go even further of like, these aren't technically people or infected. It's the fungus. So the people that you're killing, you have to separate that. Like these aren't people anymore. This is a fungus. This is a parasite.
There's a lot of dissociation that has to happen in order for you to determine that something is
Oh,
bad.
I don't think you could survive the apocalypse without being able to dissociate.
Well, no, I think like you have to separate yourself from whatever situation you're in or whatever is happening
Yeah.
in order to determine that the thing that you're going up against is bad. Because if you look at The Last of Us and you go, oh my gosh, everyone here is a person, you're gonna crawl into a hole and starve, like wait until you starve to death. Like, you literally have to look at every single person infected in The Last of Us, and you have to make them not people anymore.
Yeah.
Like, it's like
Well, and I
sad,
think
but
there is like the ease of it because they aren't, at some point they don't become human anymore. Like they
Right.
obviously visually are not human.
Mhm.
But I think that's what makes it even harder, seeing someone else get bit and then knowing that the only way for them to have a peaceful death is to kill them first.
right.
And I think that plays a big part in shows like earlier I wanted to talk about the Walking Dead is another franchise that is obviously very popular for being an apocalyptic show with zombies and things. A big thing there when they talk about morals is like, when someone is infected, you don't just leave them to die, because that is suffering. You're leaving that person to suffer for however long it takes for them. And so there's the moral question of like, I am killing a person. This is not an infected, but I know where this ends. So it's the question of like, do I betray my own morals then in order to almost keep my morals in other ways? Like, it's picking and choosing which morals are you okay with breaking to be able to not have to sacrifice other ones.
Okay, here's one thing, and you can cut this out if you think this is way too controversial.
Okay.
I wonder how many people in an apocalypse would become pro-choice.
I think they'd have to be.
I just think that's so, like,
I'm
how many
leaving
people
that
would,
in. I want to know people's answers to that,
how many
actually.
people would stick to their guns and remain pro-life in an apocalypse?
Well, I mean, if we talk about, this is actually one of the differences from, the show and the game. My besties, Bill and Frank. We're not really told this specifically, but in the show, it takes place in 2003. So obviously we're very short after 2001, 9/11. And there's like honestly a little bit funny to me how many times it's brought up like inherently in the show, just times that they talk about 9/11. But you see a lot of it with Bill, and he is known in the game and definitely more so in the show with being kind of a survivalist, end of the world scenario kind of guy. He has, a huge armory in his basement. He's been prepared for this since 9/11, is what we can assume. And he even, like, there's a part in the show where he is hearing people search his house, even though he's obviously hidden, and he calls them neo-Nazis, which is actually improv. So Nick Offerman, amazing job. It was improv. Amazing that's comedians playing serious roles are one of my favorite things in the entire world. But you see this guy who is obviously, like, we're told in the game more about how he is this insanely conservative guy who goes through the apocalypse and then ends up realizing a lot of himself is only conservative because that's what he was taught. That's what he was, like, almost groomed into believing by the media, by the people that he lived with, by his family. And then he goes in the apocalypse and he realizes that how much of this doesn't even matter.
Yeah.
I mean, we find out, Bill's actually gay. He ends up having in the show, he has a very happy life with Frank. It's a little bad. It's worse in the game. We thank HBO for episode 3 of The Last of Us.
God bless. God bless episode 3.
Amazing job with their story.
If you're gonna just if you're not interested in watching The Last of Us,
you can watch
just watch episode 3.
You can watch episode 3 of The Last of Us,
3.
especially if, like, you don't do zombies, you don't do, infection, you don't like watching people get killed. You can still watch episode 3. There's no zombies, there's no clickers, there's no infected, there's literally just...
There are, but not, like, up close.
No, there's...
That's not the focus of the episode.
No. In my opinion, and I think this is going to be controversial, but I don't really care, I think it is one of the best episodes of television in at least the last 5, if not longer, years.
I agree with that.
It is amazing. The tears that I shed watching that episode.
For sure.
But I think that is a big question of, like, how much of the morals that we have now are just based upon what we've been taught, and also how much of that really actually matters in end of the world scenarios. Because if we're, a lot of people are like, oh, I hate black people, I hate gay people, I hate trans people, I hate, blah, 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 blah. What happens when your
one
survivability...
of those people is your only choice to survive? Yeah.
Are you going to die? That's actually another question. How are you willing to sacrifice yourself at your own morals, at the risk of your own morality? Are you going to let yourself die because you have enough pride in your own morality? Like, is that enough for you to give up your own livelihood?
Oh, that's an amazing question. Like, oh my god.
I wish I could end it on that. I wish I could end it on that, but...
we should wrap it up, though, because we should leave the audience with that thought.
No, I definitely...
Oh my gosh.
There's literally only one other thing I want to talk about, and that is just... I hope people finding out about this show, finding out about this franchise, can start genuinely realizing that video games are not all about Fortnite and Call of Duty and, Valorant and Overwatch and whatever big games are out right now. Like, there are genuinely storylines in video games that do more than just talk about war or, like, magical characters. Like,
I think The Last of Us is put in, like, and we even did this in this episode, is like put into the apocalypse genre. I think like we need to create a whole new genre for
The Last of Us
which
genre.
which is just humanity.
Yeah, I
The
think
Last of Us is a study in humanity,
obviously the game
and it's one of the
itself
greatest
is-
studies in humanity ever.
The Last of Us is an action-based game, but it is also just a piece of art that talks about our lives. Like, it's not even just about Joel and Ellie, because at the end of the day, it asks us questions as players, as viewers of the show, that I think aren't really talked about outside of like places like this.
For sure.
And yeah, I think that is something that we need to end on, is just, I don't know, are you willing to like give up yourself for your beliefs and your thoughts? I don't know.
I don't know.
It's a question you have to ask yourself, and I don't have the answer for that, and if you have the answer, please leave it in the comments, 'cause
Yeah,
I'd
please
love
let
to
us
know.
know.
Because that's a conversation I'd love to have with anybody. Like, genuinely, I would love to hear what you guys think about not only the game, because I love the game, but also the conversations we had today. And yeah, wrapping up, if you do want to see us do an episode on part 2, or I would also, if you do want to see an episode on The Last of Us Part 2, I will definitely talk more about spoilers in the first game, and if you're okay with spoilers talking about the second game, I can do that as well, if you guys want like a full breakdown of the franchise, because obviously I can do that. And yeah, I'm so appreciative of you guys hanging out with us.
Yeah.
I
It was
think
fun.
this was a really good episode. But
I love
Yeah.
these little chats. I love them.
it's really good, and I think it opens up a lot of things that we don't talk about outside of, little bubbles. Like, we've definitely have times, me and Spoons have definitely had times talking like by ourselves in a Discord call about things like this, and we've always wanted an excuse to kind of open up to other people, and it's honestly like a huge honor to be able to
Oh,
share
for sure.
these thoughts with not only, with Spoons, but also with you guys who watch and who subscribe and like and interact and everything, because they're just conversations that I think need to be had, and it's obviously very great. We're very grateful to have them with you, is what we're trying to say. So,
Alright.
yeah.
Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. If you guys want to hit the subscribe button down below, if you are listening or watching on Spotify, now that they approve video format, leave us a 5-star rating. I also have been doing polls on the Spotify episodes if you guys haven't checked out. So last episode we had, do you love any of these white men? Which a lot of people answered, which was actually pretty fun. So this episode, I will leave a poll for you guys on Spotify, and I will also leave one in the pinned comment, so if you guys want to check that out on YouTube. Obviously, our socials will be linked down below. Hit the subscribe and the like button, and we will chat with you guys in 2 weeks. So,
Bye-bye.
bye!